Tonight, we continued our discussion on being a moral person, what we're all striving to be. Check it out and share. So we are in the middle of discussing moral behaviors, meaning the question that was raised is the laws of gossip and how they pertain to the Noahide. And in the divine code, in which we discuss the laws, 7 rules and about 700 pages of laws, so gossip comes up twice, both in terms of a subcategory of actually murder, as we'll discuss, and as part of being a moral person. So we're starting with the moral end, then we're going to speak of gossip vis-a-vis the prohibition of murder, and then I'm going to add other more spiritual details and some laws concerning gossip. So these laws of proper behavior are found in Maimonides' work, and his monumental work in which he codifies all of the laws of the Torah. He spends a section on moral behavior, upright conduct, and all of these things are basically universal to mankind, and therefore something a Noahide will want to focus on and think about, and really trying to become a more godlike person. What does it mean godlike? Emulating moral behavior, emulating God's behaviors as far as human is capable. So the last things we were discussing was the idea of the prohibition of telling lies or being manipulative or deceitful. Then we spoke about the idea of running after money to have it, to be a miser with it, to flaunt it, to run after desires with it, to have power. All of this is considered like very base. And again, so what law are you breaking if you're a miser? What law are you breaking if you want a lot of money? It's not a godly way to behave. And the last thing we discussed was how we are so influenced by our surroundings, and being careful in terms of our surroundings and understanding that we are very susceptible. And Maimonides writes that this is man. Man is susceptible to his surroundings. I remember Ruth, who just joined us, said last week that she worked on herself to not be susceptible to her surroundings, and I was very impressed, because the nature of the human, all of us, is to be influenced by our surroundings. And this, I still feel, a week later, is a great challenge for a Noahide, because an Orthodox Jew could put themselves in a bubble where many of their friends and acquaintances and people they do dealings with all day long are other Orthodox Jews. Rarely does a Noahide have such an opportunity to be surrounded only by Noahide. It's much more common to be the only Noahide in the group. And therefore, this is something very, very, very relevant to a Noahide, to really think and make some choices. Like Ruth said, she worked on herself to not be affected, to learn how to select wisely, to learn how to detach, because as Maimonides is saying here, this is true for all man. Generally, by nature, we are very, very affected by our surroundings. It's not only for yourself personally, of course, it's also for your children. It's also for other people in your home, who they're befriending, what places they frequent. Obviously, this all is going to impact. And as you start off with little children and you could really be their whole world, but as they get older, you can't be their whole world. And these things start infringing. And then you really have to think of, like, what are going to be the house rules in terms of their friends, in terms of where they go, because obviously it's all going to make an impact. On the other hand, just as we are so influenced by our surrounding, we have an obligation to influence our surroundings. Now, of course, this is something we have touched on many times in this class, because this is a critical responsibility of a Noahide. There's only about 8 billion mankind out there, 15 million Jews. How many Noahides? So every Noahide is like hand selected by God and has a mission, a mandate to influence. To influence who? Who's going to listen to my voice? Figure out your way of your voice being heard and who can listen to your voice. There are so many different circles and circles and circles and circles. You never know. You never know where something is going to wind up. Whatever. I mean, this is not really relevant, but I had translated something and someone published it and put it in a certain synagogue in New York this weekend. And someone I know in New York doesn't live in this area at all, doesn't have anything to do with these people at all. I have no clue how got and studied this work. And of course, she reached out to me because she knows me. She was so excited to see my name on it. And I was like, how did she get it? I asked, she never answered, whatever, a disjointed WhatsApp conversation. But I was like, wow, You never know where something's going to wind up. You never know where something's going to go. So we have the obligation, every single one of us, and I think a Noahide has a special obligation, if I may say so, to be an influencer, right? It's a term people like to use, to be truly the real meaning of a positive influencer for whatever your circles are, if they're family, if they're colleagues, if they're neighbors, whatever your circles are, you should always look at yourself like, I am here as an influencer. And it just happens to be a business meeting, happens to be a family get together. There's no such luxury in my life. I am an influencer. God put me in this situation for me to influence others, because there's very few Noachides and there's billions of mankind. So that means those few Noachides have to have a very loud voice to influence, to make a difference. And then it's ripple effects. If you influence someone, then they can carry it further and influence someone else. You can say something, it doesn't seem like the other person's hearing, they heard, and then they could share it with someone else. Who could share it with someone? You don't know who the intended audience is. You can let God do his thing, but you have to do yours. And therefore, it's really an obligation of all mankind, and very strongly of the Noahide, to influence people around them, to influence positively, with friendliness, in a sociable fashion, obviously not in a harsh, who would try to influence in a harsh fashion or a negative fashion, like who's going to listen to you, but in a friendly, warm fashion to influence. Has anyone picked up any tips for this as they've been walking their road for all these years? Anyone has things they've seen worked, ways they do it, ways they try to help others?
I would say it's more about doing it yourself, not necessarily telling others what they should or shouldn't do.
Well, that could be a very strong way to influence others, because being a living example is an amazing,
right,
quiet, loud message. It really is, meaning there's an obligation to help create a moral world. The world was created to be a moral world. And of course, each person who's living as a Noahide is helping God have a moral world by virtue of yourself. Each man is an island, and you are creating for God a moral world in your domain. But for that same reason, because God wants a moral world, he's injuncting us to help him by helping others also realize those values in a positive way, if you can. Each person seeing, and again, it could very well be by being a living example of all the positives, all the perks, all the benefits of leading a godly life, of having the truth, the inner peace that comes with knowing why you're here and what you're doing and why it's valuable, that you walk and live in such a way that people say, I want what she has. What does she have? That's all part of influencing the world. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's stickier. Like, people don't want to hear my voice. So everyone has to find their own comfort zone of how they can talk. But just imagine if someone out there who's this potential Noahide, but he was never told. Nobody ever shared anything with him that he knew. Or conversely, imagine if in your journey, whatever was that critical piece that gave you information never happened, and then you never had it. So you never could walk this road. So one way or another, sometimes we're in situations where we really, it's not always so comfortable for us, in a soft way, with a joke, with a friendliness, with a smile. We need to try, especially if we see people doing wrong, to convey God's vision. Now, sometimes we think, well, they're not interested in hearing. Clearly, based on what they're doing, they're not interested in hearing. That's not always true. A lot of people are just ignorant. They don't know. It's not like suddenly you tell them, and then suddenly you're like, oh, thank you for opening up my eyes. Now I'm turning my life around. But you said the truth, said it from your heart. It's true words. If it's true words from your heart, we trust that it penetrates. Now, if you see someone now this gets much more specific. If someone is sinning, is transgressing, is following an improper path, and you have the ability to help them, even if it's very uncomfortable to have such conversations, it's really our moral obligation to try to speak to the person patiently, respectfully, with love, with compassion for their struggles. But we really are being here God's mouthpiece to give this person the message that what they're doing is wrong. Obviously, when you're talking very carefully. You want to get into the other person's heart. You obviously don't want to say anything that's going to make them feel like, I don't want to listen to you, but in a very soft, gentle way. You really want to help another person get off the wrong road. Now, obviously, if you're talking to a person and you see they are not in a space to hear you, you don't have to keep talking. You're just, get into a pointless fight. I mean, that's not the goal. But if you tried and they didn't listen and they continue doing whatever they're doing that's wrong, then you have an obligation to create some distance between you and them. Because again, as we said before, if they're continuing to do the wrong and you weren't able to inspire them to change, there's always the fear that they could be influencing you. And that's why there needs to be that distance on some level between you and the other person. Also, if someone's doing something wrong and you aren't objecting, it seems sort of like you're condoning it. That's also a big problem. You have to be very careful not to condone evil. And sometimes we're like, well, what can I do about it anyway? But we can never allow ourselves that attitude. Every one of us, we have a power. We are a person. And if something wrong is going on and we don't protest, then we're sort of helping that wrong. We're sort of giving our energy to it. And that's why we have to condone evil and not just say, oh, nothing I would do is make a difference. If it's, let's say I'm just giving a small little example, just to bring up the point. Let's say, there's an election going on and where you live and it's very clear which candidate's going to win. But the other candidate who is going to lose is supporting moral choices, and one who's going to win for sure is supporting not moral choices. Then you have a moral obligation to go and vote for the other person. What's the point? Why am I wasting my time? Drive there. It'll take me a half an hour. Why am I wasting a half an hour of my life when I know this person's going to lose? I'm a prophet. I know this person's going to lose, because you have to give your voice of protest. Even though, what's the point? There's a point to giving your voice of protest. I don't know, again, if anyone's had experience in this where they've seen a friend doing something they know is wrong and has spoken to them, and actually they've seen that the person's listened to them. It's always nice to hear that, because then we have more faith to do it another time, because it's a little intimidating. I don't want to hurt the relationship. Who am I to tell someone else what to do? America, we're very trained with this. They're not hurting me, then how do I have the right to say what they're doing is wrong? Live and let live, which is not necessarily a godly approach always.
Well,
I have some. Oh, go ahead, Dixie. Sorry.
It's around us constantly. And how the problem is, I had today another run-in, and I confronted the person, but then they got more adamant about what they were saying, and how do I want to put it? They were speaking bad of a dead person, and you can't do that. And by doing that, they've caused a big problem. But you can't explain that to them, and you just want to choke them. But it's like you just gotta back off and ignore them, and it's hard.
Sometimes if you're saying you've tried and they're not listening to you, and if they're talking, your best thing is to not respond. And if you don't respond, hopefully, the conversation is going to fizzle away. If they're saying something almost to incite you and you just let it pass, that might be the best strategy of saying, this is wrong, I'm not going to respond to you, and then they'll stop. So sometimes in conversation, that is really what you need to do.
Yeah, and the thing is, when I should have shut up the very first thing she said back to me, and when she asked me who my rabbi was, and I got 2 or 3 rabbis, not just one, and I said the name of the rabbi that is deceased, and boy, she just come up with all this horrible stuff about him, and I said, that's not true. And then she started worse and worse, and it's like, okay, just shut up, because the more you entice her, the more she's going to keep it up, whether it's true or not. You just have to shut up.
Sometimes when you're in a conversation with a person who seems to want to pick a fight, antagonize, negative attention, whatever you want to call it, you just don't respond. And that's the best way. And again, as we're going to discuss about gossip, we'll get into that. That's definitely something we sometimes have to do. Danielle, what were you going to add?
Yeah, I was just going to share that I don't have a lot of these experiences, because I will say I definitely shy away from these type of conversations because it's difficult for me. But, I've certainly had examples when this has happened, and usually it's successful because I wouldn't go into this type of conversation without feeling pretty confident about it, because if I feel like they're going to be defensive or upset, I just won't bring it up typically. um
So you're saying you very carefully select who gets the
yes.
benefit of your experience and wisdom, and then
Yeah.
that person usually is receptive because you selected her very carefully.
Yes, or I mean, I would say I'm more not as direct too, where maybe people I'm not sure if they'll be as open. I'm maybe not as direct, like, you shouldn't be doing this, or, I use a lot of the things you mentioned, but more of like talking about it from my perspective and not really saying like the way you're dressing is kind of inappropriate, for example, something like that. Instead, I would do something like, I'd be getting dressed or whatever, like my friends are over or something. And I'd be like, oh, I was going to wear this, but I think it's too low. So I'm going to go put a shirt underneath it, or, something like that. Or I think this dress might be too short, or, just kind of, I guess
That's a great
trying
way.
to,
That's a great way to
yeah,
do it. I mean,
yeah,
it's just like,
yeah.
it's a wonderful way to influence. Definitely
Hmm.
like with children, this is a really good
Yes,
tactic, because when
yes,
anyone points a finger at you, you feel defensive and you shut down. You are doing this wrong. Ugh, I'm not going to hear you. I don't
exactly.
want to hear you. I have enough self-esteem
Yep,
not to want to hear you. But if you're talking
yeah,
about yourself, that's interesting. So I'm
yep,
really
exactly.
hot. I mean, now it's cold. Let's pretend. I'm really hot and I really don't want to wear this, but I know this is what God wants. So I'm going to add an extra layer to get those sleeves long,
Yep,
to get that neckline built up. That's
yep.
in a person's head. It was really hard for me to be honest in that store. I saw that I could have gotten away with it, but I'm like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it for this amount of money to lose my honesty. So I went and I told them, whatever, da, 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 da.
It's a
Those
really good point. I
little
do
things,
that all the time with my kids. Yep.
that's
Yep.
that's your that's your
Yep.
biggest and most significant
Yep.
audience.
Yep.
But I mean, also, like, if you would know a friend who has a situation with honesty or has a situation with modesty, every once in a while, I wouldn't say every day, but every once in a while, sharing a personal story of how just sharing.
Yeah.
Everyone likes to hear other
Hmm.
people's lives, so to speak. How I struggled with honesty in the store today, how I struggled with modesty when I was getting dressed. And then 2 or 3 days later, another story. And then 2 or 3 days later, another story. Give it 6 months. You've saturated this woman with your stories, and it's going to get in her head. And I've seen it very effectively exactly that way. It's very delicate. You're never pointing a finger. You're never saying what they're doing is wrong. But you feel an obligation. This is a friend of mine. I can casually bring in a lot of things. And she's struggling with modesty. She's struggling with honesty or whatever else. I could bring in and then bring in twice a week, bring in, and then drop. She starts thinking differently. And then she's like, honestly, I just didn't feel comfortable wearing that anymore. It just feels too revealing. You're like, wow, wonder how that happened. So that is a great way to do it. And again, if you can think of friends, if you notice things with friends, instead of feeling, well, I can't say anything, and instead of saying it directly, that soft approach can really help someone. I think that's in the end what we always have to go back to. I'm helping this person. I care about her. I care about him. I really do. This is a friend of mine. This is family. This is another human being. I care about them. That's why I'm saying this. I'm not saying it to be holier than thou. I'm not saying it because I know so much and they know so little. I'm saying this because I want to help the other person. And I know if they dress more modestly, their life will be better. And if they are more honest, their life will be better. I know if they have a better relationship with their parents, their life will be better. And if they have a better relationship with their children, their life will be better. I want to help them because I care about people. And we always remember, I'm doing it for the other person, and the other person is going to really benefit from this. It also, I know for myself, it makes me feel not like a schlepper, what am I going? And no, because I care, which is why you're bothering, because you care. In general, we always want to be respectful of every person, not just people we are trying to influence. People we need to give a message to, that we want to, sandwich it in among a few sweet words. No, we have an obligation to be respectful to every person. We want to honor every person. We want to speak about people and notice the positive. Our goal is not to notice the negative. Again, if you can help the person, you noticed it and you can help them and move on. Don't talk to your spouse about it. But when we're looking at a person, our general perspective is see their good, celebrate their good, acknowledge their good, and the other stuff, try not to notice. Again, unless there's something you can do about it. And there's a lot of negativity in this world, Maimonides teaches us, that stems from people doing exactly the opposite. Seeing the bad, noticing the bad, talking about the bad, accentuating the bad. Lubavitcher Rebbe says when you think about someone else's bad, let alone when you talk about someone else's bad, you actually strengthen their bad. So the best way to help them and you is to think about their good, focus on their good, view them as good. And this automatically is already strengthening the good inside of them. In general, with people, sometimes people are going to mess us over. You know, there are such people in the world, and we want to work so hard not to bear a grudge, not to take revenge. You know, I was speaking with a woman today who's going through a very messy divorce. Her ex-husband had done something so she couldn't have the children for 2 days, and then she said to me, and, you know, then he asked me, could he take them 2 hours early for whatever? And I wanted to say, no, after what you just did to me, of course not. I said, but then I don't want to be like him. I didn't do it because I don't want to be like him. And I was like, wow, you know, because that really hurt her so much. But she's just because it hurt her so much, she doesn't want to be like that. So in life, we can go the high road, and there are people that are not on that high road. And there's people that can hurt us accidentally or deliberately. In either case, sages say one who fights with someone who's dirty becomes dirty. We don't want to get dirty in the process. It's like going back to what Dixie was saying. If someone's picking a fight, just ignore it. Let it be wind in your ears. Don't get hurt because that's what they want. That's what I said to her. I said, well, he wants to hurt you. So just remember, if you're getting hurt, that's what he wants. Detach. Don't bear the grudge. Don't bear the pain. Don't try to take revenge. Walk a godly moral road and let these things just dissipate. So that's in general, and of course there's much more, some of Maimonides' perspectives and tips on how we are supposed to live a moral, godly life. And from that perspective, we can't gossip because that's not part of the makeup of a moral, godly person. There's also a specific injunction that's forbidding gossip to the Noahide under one of the 7 laws, and as we said, it's under the law of murder. Again, 7 laws. How could there be 700 pages of rules? Because every law is very complex, and every one of the 7 laws of the Noahides is really a broad topic in which there are many, many subtopics. So under thou shalt not murder is, of course, also abortion, is also euthanasia, and is also gossip. Because anything you say that harms a person falls under thou shalt not harm a person, which is one of the subsidiary branches of thou shalt not murder. And therefore, gossip is absolutely forbidden to a Noahide. It's not just, well, I'm going to be a moral, godly person, which we need to be a moral, godly person. It's also like, it's not optional. It's not like, well, I could be nice and gossip, or I could just be base. You know, I could be nice and not gossip, and holy and not gossip, or I could just be, you know, a little more base today and indulge in gossip. No, you're not allowed to indulge in gossip. Absolutely forbidden. Definitely a constant temptation for all of us, or for many of us, but absolutely forbidden. So again, where is it forbidden? Where does it say you can't gossip in the 7 laws? You can't murder. Under you can't murder, you can't harm someone. And one of the many things enumerated that cause harm is gossiping, tale-bearing, embarrassing. The same way you're not allowed to gossip, you're not allowed to embarrass. Well, I'm not gossiping. I'm telling the person to their face, whatever. I'm not talking to anyone else. I'm talking to them. Right. Completely forbidden. Absolutely 100% forbidden. Why? You can't murder. Therefore, you can't harm. Therefore, you can't embarrass. Just like you can't murder. Therefore, you can't harm. Therefore, you can't gossip. So humiliating a person or embarrassing a person, we're saying, is the same in the same situation. Even if you're just saying words. If you're calling a person by an embarrassing name, if you're saying something to him directly, nobody else is around, to embarrass him, absolutely forbidden. Sages say that whoever who causes another person's face to pale in public has no portion in the world to come. meaning we're not allowed to insult another person with words to the extent that something happens on his face. It could flush, it could change colors. Already, we lost it, and this is punishable by God. He has no portion of the world to come is a very big consequence, which shows how severe this is. So that's the embarrassing. And then there's the gossip, which might be more natural to us. I mean, to embarrass someone, like I wouldn't do that. Sometimes we slip up and embarrass people we don't mean to because we're being thoughtless. It's not deliberate. I'm not trying to embarrass them. Just like if you're with a group of people and one person just lost their job, and you start having a conversation about the recession and how all these people are losing their job, you're totally not thinking about the other person. You're totally not trying to hurt their feelings. And then suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, how do I clean this up really fast? Or any other such conversation where you don't mean to embarrass the other person, but you weren't being thoughtful enough, focused enough on what's coming out of my mouth and who are the people that I'm talking with. So we have to be focused because we could definitely hurt people without meaning to, let alone if you mean to. Gossiping. So we're going to discuss this more later in detail, but there's lots of levels of gossiping. There's gossiping when you're spreading what might be viewed as innocuous information, but you're not supposed to talk about other people. And then, of course, there's what's called evil gossip, which is spreading derogatory information, bad information. And then there's libeling, when you're saying something that's derogatory and not even true. All of those are forbidden. Even repeating what could be not necessarily bad. So-and-so bought a house. What's bad about that? I'm not saying anything bad. I'm not saying they did anything bad and it's true. And like, gotta be careful. Gotta be careful. We don't just talk about other people. That's the general rule. Don't talk about other people. Talk about concepts. Talk about ideas. Talk about God. Talk about serving God. Don't talk about people. Because even if you're saying something, oh, so-and-so got a new position, they're now a teacher in the school, you never know. Maybe the person you're talking to are like, so-and-so, he's a teacher? She bought a house? So you never know what that totally innocuous comment could trigger from the other person. So rule, don't talk about other people. In the prophets, now this person did do it deliberately, but it says that when David was running from King Saul and Noah, the city of the priests, took him in that night, not knowing there was anything going on between David and Saul. They knew David as Saul's son-in-law, so they weren't rebelling against the king. They thought this is the son-in-law of the king, and they took care of him. He went on his way. Someone deliberately mentioned to the king, oh, that city of priests, Noah, took care of David for a night, and Saul had them all completely wrong, of course. But in his head, well, if I'm doing David as a rebel, these people are protecting the rebel. They're all rebels. This person did it deliberately. This person died by the hand of God at a very young age. It wasn't accidental. Just happened to be casting on a piece of casual information. But from here, we see how you can't even say positive things. You never know where it's going to go to. Now, of course, not only is it forbidden to say gossip, it's forbidden to hear it. In certain situations, the person who's saying it is worse off. In certain situations, the one who's listening is considered the greater transgressor. That's a very important point for us to understand, because we could be working on ourselves and we want to be moral, and for sure we don't want to murder, and for sure we don't want to harm anyone, and for sure we would never gossip. But what do you do if the people around you are talking? So we sort of tell ourselves, whatever. So we should know. Sometimes, anytime you listen to it, even though you don't want to, it's a problem. And sometimes, depending on which specific category is being said here, of the three categories of gossip, sometimes the person who listens is considered worse than the person who's saying it. Considered worse. It's a greater transgression to God. Anyone has been in this situation? I'm sure we've all been in this situation. And has any practical tips to share with us?
When someone is talking about gossip around me, I try to say positive things or change the subject naturally. If they mention, and I don't know if this is the right thing, so tell me if this isn't, but let's say that, someone's talking about someone negatively or even just talking about them, and I'll say like, oh yeah, she's so sweet. Last time I saw her, I just had such a nice time with her, or, something positive. And then, oh yeah, speaking of, that same day I went to this coffee shop and I wanted to tell you about it. They have really nice coffee. I thought you'd like it. Kind of trying to change the subject that way. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. And I would say this is something I struggle with a lot.
Yes, both of those things are good ideas. Definitely changing the subject. Obviously, you don't want to say, well, I do not listen to gossip, so can we please talk about something else? Because the other person's going to be really offended. You just offended someone. You might have embarrassed them, and then you said it in a different way. So definitely gracefully, if you're on the phone and someone starts talking like that, you could just be, oops, I gotta go. The kids are calling me, and you know what happens if you ignore that, or it's always a good excuse, or your husband or work, depending what time of day it is. Sometimes just the simplest thing is just to just get off the call. If it's in person, how rare, just some of us have the luxury of having in-person conversations with people, but if it's in person, definitely it's good to change the subject. Talking positively might work, but like as Dixie's example that she just shared with us, it could just incite the person more. Really? You think so? They fooled you? I know they're so smooth. I know they act that way. You should only know. So if you've had success with it, I guess your customers, and maybe this person is really like the type of person that would say, oh, really? Wow, that's so nice to know. I thought they were so stuck up. It's so nice to know they're friendly and nice people. Thanks for sharing. So if you know this person and you feel, no, if I said something positive, she would accept it and would turn her thinking around, then it would be a good idea. But if you don't know, it's better to be cautious. And that is the reason why the sages say that you can't praise people in front of people indiscriminately for exactly that reason, because you don't know who's in your audience and you don't know what they feel about that person. And maybe your nice positive words could inspire someone to say, really? No, they're not like that at all. But definitely, if you're on the phone, have to go is great. If you're in person, talking about the coffee shop is great. Distracted about something is great. And sometimes, if it works, if you see this person's like on a warpath and you're not going to get them off it, detaching yourself from the group, got to make a phone call, just realize, sorry guys, I'll be back in a few minutes, something like that, just to like get away from that conversation. Literally, when we're talking about, again, as we said, there's 3 potential areas here. If someone is saying something innocuous, not necessarily negative and true, or if someone is saying something negative and true, or if someone is saying something that's a libel, negative and not true. But the middle ground, which is probably the most common gossip, negative and true, it says the listener is sinning greater than the one who says it. So when someone is gossiping, is chewing off your ear about someone, and you're like, no, I don't really accept this. No, I don't want to hear this. It's really it's a very bad situation for us to be in. It's really a dangerous, negative situation for us to be in. We're transgressing just by staying in that situation. And that's why we really do need to figure out some way to leave or change the conversation. Now, there is a concept that if this is public knowledge, it's no longer considered this evil gossip. Because gossip by definition means something that's not known. That's why we're gossiping about it. Public knowledge is if at least 3 people know it. If you were in the presence, or if someone said something to 3 people, and the assumption is those 3 people are then going to go on and tell it to more people and more people and more people, because that's what happens in our world. And as long as the world's been around, that's what people do. Then you could say, well, it's not technically this, what's called evil gossip, lashon hara, evil gossip. That's what it means, because it's public knowledge. It doesn't mean we want to hear it. Obviously, it doesn't mean we want to say it. But there is that caveat that if it's public knowledge, it's not technically evil gossip. And therefore, as I'm saying, like the incrimination, like listening to this being so damaging to you, would not apply because it's not really evil gossip. It's wrong, but it's not evil gossip, lashon hara. Now, on a different level, sometimes someone could be saying something to warn you. You had a horrible contractor that completely messed you over, totally dishonest, stole and left the job, and whatever he did had to be redone. It cost you even more money. And then you hear a friend of yours is taking that same contractor. You're allowed to go and warn your friend. That is not called evil gossip. Even though you're going to say some very negative things about this person, you are allowed to do it. Even if the opposite, if your friend came and asked you about the person, you're allowed to say the truth, because you're not saying it for the goal of gossip. You're saying it for the goal of warning them. This actually literally happened to me because I had a very dishonest contractor. And then I heard about another organization that was taking the same contractor. And I was like, oh, I have to warn them. Yeah, I was doing it purely just to warn them. They're like, well, we're already in contract, but thanks for the warning. I'm like, okay, got to protect. That is totally allowed to say it, allowed to listen to it. But if someone starts talking to you, you have to right away make that very fast judgment. Is this information, even if officially it's being given to, warn me, is this information something I need to know? Like, this person's dishonest. Am I engaging in a business with them, or about to engage in a business with them, or potentially can engage with the business with them? And in that case, I do need to know this, and then I'm allowed to listen. Or I have no business dealings with this person at all. Like, they're well above my business level. I don't have business dealing. Well, then thank you so much for the warning. But you know what? This has nothing to do with my life. So thank you for being helpful, but I don't need to hear it. And you could cut off the person, because the person's saying, I just want to warn you. And right away you see where it's going. And you're not saying you're assuming what the person's saying is true, but you could already speculate where it's going. And you're like, well, that has nothing to do with my life. So I appreciate, you could say it. So when I say, I appreciate the warning, but actually it's not really relevant in my world. I don't need to hear more garbage about people. I know way too much garbage about way too many people. I don't want to hear anymore. Thanks so much. But it was very kind of you to want to warn me. Or similarly, if you see someone doing something wrong and you go to their teacher or their parent to say, I just want to let you know what I saw your child doing. I know it's sort of hard for me to share this with you, but I know you're the parent. You need to know. Or sometimes it might be more appropriate, it depends on the situation and your relationship, to say to the teacher, if this is a teacher who's caring for the child, totally, not just that they should learn math or something. I just saw your student doing something. As a teacher, I wanted you to know. That's totally permissible. That is not any category of evil gossip, even though you're saying very negative things about the person. Because clearly the fact that you're only going to the parent, only going to the teacher, or whoever else is responsible for their moral well-being and sharing this information is a clear testimony that your only intention is to help the child. And conversely, if you were the parent and someone came and said this to you about your child, obviously it's not evil gossip, and obviously you're allowed to listen and you're allowed to ask questions, and you have to sort of try not to hold anything in your heart against the person telling you this painful information, and really just take it sincerely. They're trying to help me. This is information I need to know about my child. And then thank you. So again, it can be very sticky being in that situation. And sometimes you could say, well, I know it's not gossip. I know I'm allowed to tell it to the parent. There's no way I can say this to this parent. I can't. They won't they can't even hear it from me. Maybe I can think of someone that I could say it to who can say it to the parent. Now, again, you can't randomly pick the biggest, nosy buddy on the block. But if there's someone like this parent's confidant, mentor, someone that has that type of relationship with them, and they will be able to tell it to them, and you don't want them to know it's coming from you because they would be embarrassed, because if they knew it came from you, they wouldn't be able to hear it. You will be allowed to do that. Again, your goal sincerely is to help this child, is to tell this to someone who can help the child. That is not evil gossip. You're allowed to say it. You're allowed to hear it. Warning, information about another person that this person has truly done wrong things and you're scared they're going to hurt someone else. Let's say a friend of yours is going out with a guy and stuff about this guy that you would not want your friend to be seriously involved with this person. You're 100% allowed to tell your friend. And again, prefacing, I don't want to talk about other people, but since I see you're getting into a relationship with this person, I just wanted you to know certain pieces of information. She might not hear you. She might not want to listen, but you definitely, it's not gossip at all. You're 100% allowed to say it. And if conversely, someone is telling you information that you realize is relevant, you're 100% allowed to hear it. If you realize it's not relevant, you are not allowed to hear it, even though the person is saying it purely to warn you officially, but it's not relevant. So you can say, I trust you. I get what you're saying, but this is not relevant to my life, so I don't need to hear it. Thank God. In general, if someone is like a real evil person, you're allowed to publicize to people just in general what's going on, so people should know and be warned. That's not considered evil gossip. That's 100% allowed. Sometimes another like sticky situation, which could seem to be gossip, but really is allowed, though of course it's not ideal, is if you were accused of something which you didn't do and you know who did it, and it's a wrong thing. Now, you're not going to regularly go around and say, oh, I saw so-and-so, you know, break into the kitchen and take all the cake. But if you're being accused of it, you are allowed to say, I didn't do it, so-and-so did it. Now, that is only a last resort. Your first resort is to say, I didn't do it, and to prove that you were nowhere in that vicinity, are allergic, are watching yourself so carefully, would never touch a piece of cake. You know, anything you can say to defend yourself without having to actually point a finger to someone else. But if nothing's believed, and the only thing they will believe is you actually can say who did it, to vindicate yourself, if you have no choice and there's nothing else to say, you can say who actually did it. Let's say you see a group of friends talking, and you know these friends all like to talk about people. You're not allowed to go over and join that conversation. Even at this moment, you know, when you get closer, you hear they're talking about where they bought their clothing. Doesn't make a difference. If you know this is a group of people that often engage in evil gossip, you can't hang out with that group. And then say, I didn't mean it. I didn't want to hear it. It wasn't my fault. They just started talking. You know that's what they talk about. What are you joining that group for? So that's also something to be careful with, because if you know that a group or a person is very likely to start saying a lot of evil gossip, you can't put yourself in that situation and then, so to speak, plead innocent to God that, like, I didn't know what they were going to say. Of course you know what they were going to say. You know what they always say. So unless you're in a situation where I have to say socially hi, and I could very quickly say, oh, I have to go to my husband, I have to go to my kids, I have to make that phone call, like, you could extricate yourself super fast. Otherwise, you are not allowed to join that little klitsch, you know, that little group, because you know what's going to go on there. You know, just another point along this is nowadays there's a lot of media that has a lot of evil gossip in it, meaning things that they are purporting as true, but it's very negative about other people. Because, of course, it's not just human nature to like to say it, you also like to absorb it. So this sells papers or digital whatever, magazines, TV, radio, internet. There's a lot of evil gossip out there in the world. If there's some media or publication or something whose sort of purpose of existence is promoting evil gossip, as definitely I'm sure we all know such tabloids and things like that, it is forbidden to read it. It is forbidden to subscribe to it, because you're supporting the commerce of evil gossip. You're reading something, I don't know, it's hard to whitewash any newspaper or media nowadays. I'm not giving any specific examples, but let's say there's actually something out there that, no, they're not the business of evil gossip. 90% of what they're doing is not. So while something comes in, then you're allowed to read it, you're allowed to subscribe to it, because obviously if there's a whole article dedicated to something negative about someone, you're not allowed to read that article. But if it was like just in between words, in between something else you're reading, then you'd be allowed to, because the goal of this publication and the goal of this article, the goal of this show is not evil gossip. It just got sprinkled in because they know that's what attracts people. Then you're allowed to subscribe to it, you're allowed to watch it, you're allowed to read it. But if the goal is, like I'm saying, a tabloid, if the goal is to promote evil gossip as the hook that's going to snare you, and we just keep feeding you and feeding you and feeding you it, forbidden to watch, forbidden to read, forbidden to subscribe. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely forbidden. Now, again, as we're saying, if something is public knowledge, it's no longer considered in this category of evil gossip. So we said, well, what if I know that someone told this to 3 people, then already I'm told 3 people is, you know, it's very public knowledge. Generally, we assume so because we assume the 3 are going to spread it to more and more and more. But if someone said something to 3 people, but said to the people, you're not allowed to share this with anyone, irrelevant if they do, if they don't, that would not be considered public knowledge, because even though 3 people were told, they were told it's got to stop here. Might or might not. But since they were told that, it's still considered private information. If it's private information and you listen to it or repeat it, it's evil gossip. If it's public information, no, everyone in the world knows about this. Everyone's talking about it. There's lots of things that everyone in the world talks about. Unfortunately, it's not technically evil gossip. You still shouldn't listen to it, and you still shouldn't read it, and you still shouldn't watch it, and you still shouldn't talk about it. None of it's good for you. None of it's good for anyone else you're talking to about it. But it's not the technical evil gossip that we're saying is so evil and so damaging to the one who says it and to the one who listens. So hopefully you heard something you didn't know before. Hopefully you re-inspired, because of course we're all human and this is our world. And even if you totally don't want to go in this direction, you got to really be strong and have your tools ready. Like Danielle shared some tools of how you're going to prevent yourself from falling prey to being the listener in this situation. But as everything else in the world, we do our part and we trust that God protects and will do his. Thank you so much for joining. Have a wonderful week.